This isn't the Reanimal video we were supposed to do. In fact, Jer and I agreed to review the game months before its release.
After we both played the demo, we saw so much potential for the former Little Nightmares developers Tarsier.
But to be perfectly blunt, I was thoroughly disappointed by the game.
And while I don't think I was as disappointed as Dylan, it certainly fell below the expectations I had for it. By no means do I think it was a failure though. Tarsier's ability to craft haunting, creepy, atmospheric little worlds is still unrivaled, and there are some really great ideas here.
Other than the world and general presentation, I can't really praise that much about Reanimal. Puzzles were basically non-existent, there were really no engaging or unique mechanics, and the game was over in a blink of an eye.
Normally I would almost never bring this up because it's such a subjective topic, but the price isn't helping here either.
$40 for a 3-hour game is truly ridiculous.
$50 if you're a victim like me who bought the deluxe edition.
I know somebody in the comments is going to say, well, it's really more like 6 hours if you try to find all the collectibles, but come on man, you know that's not like the same thing as having more game to play. Rather than review Reanimal, we actually thought it would be more fun to have a nuanced discussion about the internet's favorite comparison.
Now, I typically wouldn't really like the idea of pitting two games against each other in this manner, but the fact that Little Nightmares 3 and Reanimal feel so much like two branching paths for the same series, this seems like the most fitting way to talk about both of these games.
Leading up to its release, Reanimal had a bit of a strange aura around it. Just 4 months earlier, Little Nightmares 3 came out. It was the first game in the franchise to not be developed by Tarsier Studios. Tarsier left the Little Nightmares series behind to develop Reanimal.
After Tarsier cut ties with Bandai Namco, who did not let them take the series with them, Little Nightmares was instead handed off to Supermassive Games. Given their history of horror and platforming, they seemed like a good fit, having worked on titles like The Quarry and The Devil in Me, as well as expansions for the Little Big Planet series.
To me, Little Nightmares 3 was an entirely inoffensive game. I genuinely don't think it's a bad game at all, but there's also not a single thing that I would praise about it. It's the definition of a middling game.
There's good ideas in it for sure, but nothing so excellent that it reaches the same fanfare the first two achieved.
Fans online were quick to hate on Little Nightmares 3, calling it a mediocre joke without even playing it.
I remember seeing videos on YouTube with inflammatory titles like Little Nightmares 3 is a complete travesty, or Little Nightmares 3 ruined the series, and while people are entitled to their opinion, this seems far more like dogpiling than an actual review.
They quickly began claiming that Reanimal would be the real Little Nightmares 3. And to be honest, even I bought into that narrative. Surely Tarsier wouldn't leave behind their treasured IP to make a simply identical game, right? I convinced myself that there must be some sort of defining feature that separated Reanimal from the Little Nightmares series. Perhaps a deeper level of interaction with your partner character, maybe more mechanically rich puzzles utilizing tools given to the player, or level design reaching new heights for Tarsier. Or, because now there's voice dialogue, maybe there would be a slightly more present story. Well, no, and no.
Just like Little Nightmares 3, Reanimal does have some fresh ideas, and with a move away from mostly side-scrolling to full 3D movement, there's a higher emphasis on exploration. But these alone aren't enough to claim that Reanimal is some sort of savior for the Little Nightmares style.
This is one of those moments where you have to cut through the thick fog of internet discussion and try to see clearly with your own two eyes. The internet would have you believing that Little Nightmares 3 is an abomination not worth acknowledging, while Reanimal is an unparalleled stroke of genius. But to both of us, neither of those statements are really true.
Both games managed to introduce some pretty interesting and unique ideas that help push this niche genre forward, but they also both find ways to fail in avenues where the other doesn't.
When I play a puzzle platformer, I think of the greats such as Ico, Inside, Limbo, and yes, the first two Little Nightmares games. All of the games I just listed seamlessly meld their minimalistic gameplay into their respective world. When I was playing Reanimal for the first time, it seriously felt like I was replaying a game that I already played, mostly because of how fast I was flying through it.
There's a very noticeable lack of exploration required here, with most puzzles having very obvious solutions, with those solutions never being particularly far from the goal.
The level design is constantly funneling the player to the finish line with almost no real branching pathways or head-scratching puzzles.
On top of that, Reanimal was very much designed with co-op play in mind. However, in execution, you would be hard-pressed to believe it wasn't just tacked on at the end. That's because the utilization of this aspect is rarely ever touched upon in any real meaningful way. There's a couple of more complex co-op puzzles here, like the engine cylinder room that requires one person to control the rotation while the other makes their way across, but most of the joint gameplay boils down to extremely rudimentary tasks, like needing both players to hold an analog stick to pry a door open. This is actually an area that, while not fully excelling in, Little Nightmares 3 does do noticeably better.
Jer and I both played Little Nightmares 3 together, and some of my favorite memories of that playthrough were the two of us trying to figure out how to cooperate. In Little Nightmares 3, each character has a tool that is unique to them. One of them has a bow and arrow for hitting long-range targets, and the other one has a giant wrench for destroying heavy objects. Sometimes these two items came together during a puzzle, but mostly it harmonized during combat, which I did enjoy.
These were some of the more memorable combat encounters too, with one player using a bow to stun the enemy while the other finishes them off with the wrench. It was a nice use of the co-op feature here, especially since the puzzles based on 2 players were a bit lacking. On the flip side, most of the puzzles unique to a specific character boil down to simply shooting ropes with the bow to lower objects, or smashing walls with the wrench to enter new areas. None of it was that compelling, and while it does a better job of individualizing the 2 characters, it's still lacking greatly.
There's nothing in Reanimal that makes the 2 main characters feel unique or like 2 halves that need each other to be whole. There's no harmonizing mechanic like I just mentioned with Little Nightmares 3. I wanted some type of mechanic with the partner character, even something that didn't seem super important. Like in Eco, having to hold Yorda's hand and know when to bring her and when to leave her behind. It just made her feel integral to the gameplay. I was just hoping Reanimal gave me something like that. Sometimes there's these objects on which you can sit on, and they serve no purpose other than a collectible for an achievement or trophy. Maybe it would have been better if, like, every 2 or 3 things that you sit on, you unlock a secret small conversation with your partner character, which would reveal more backstory and lore about the world.
When I first saw these, I thought they were going to be similar to the game Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, where you could find and sit on benches throughout your journey. In that game, while not providing any extra dialogue, they give you these nice moments of calm and reflection from the main game, as well as just a beautiful view to soak in the game's atmosphere. In Reanimal, you sometimes get that with some of the seats, but not all of them. Some of them are so unassuming and mundane that they would have just blended into the scenery had they not had a button prompt.
I remember literally smiling and cheering when the girl character would occasionally attack an enemy who had me pinned to the ground. It was the only time I felt anything towards these characters as a unit.
I wish Reanimal had more moments like this, moments that connect us to the 2 main characters, and for that matter, the 3 companions as well.
Mono and Six from Little Nightmares 2 feel like an iconic duo, emblematic of not just that game, but the series as a whole, whereas the 2 main characters in Reanimal just feel like absolutely nothing. And while I didn't feel passionate about the 2 main characters of Little Nightmares 3, I still think the game did a fantastic job at conveying the duo as best friends who would do anything for one another.
Thankfully, one of the areas that both games actually do a pretty good job at is their presentation. That's not to say that both are perfect by any means, but each game goes for a distinct art direction and level design, and both games just ooze atmosphere as a result.
Little Nightmares 3 opted for a stage-by-stage style of level design. After about 40 minutes of exploring an area, you'll find a mirror which will magically transport you to the next area. For a series and genre well known for soaking the player into their worlds, I think a stage-by-stage design actually works against that idea. Despite that, I remember some really cool locations in Little Nightmares 3, such as a horrifying carnival and a candy factory.
This is the only real critique of the world in Little Nightmares 3. It almost feels like you're playing a series of short stories rather than one cohesive game. In some ways, I can see how that design reflects the broader story being told here, but from a gameplay standpoint, I'd say it ends up working against it. Locations like the carnival and candy factory Dylan mentioned are such perfect settings for Little Nightmares' signature style of blending playful quirkiness with abstract horror. If they had found a way to blend these individual locations into one seamless journey, it would have done wonders for the game.
Reanimal goes for a seamless world. Everything connects to each other organically. You start off with a boat, and the way you go from exploring land to getting back onto your boat, it almost gave me flashbacks of like the city portion early in The Last of Us Part 2, where you would explore areas for key items, get back on your horse to find the next main area, to find more key items, rinse and repeat. The only warp in Reanimal, if you will, for lack of a better term, is a short bus ride that you take from one area to the next.
I was pleasantly surprised to find there was even some level of backtracking in Reanimal's world. Early in your adventure, you pass a giant cannon, only to come back to it later on, giving it new context. Unlike the 2 Little Nightmares titles before, which were in sort of a 2.5D layout, Tarsier made the move to develop Reanimal's world around movement in full 3D. This allows the exploration to be much more dynamic, even if they still sometimes fall back on that more diorama design from before. The only downside to this is that the gameplay works off of button prompts rather than actual dynamic items in the world.
Certain moments did stick out to me, like a movie theater, a pig pen, and even a brief deep sea excursion. But again, I can't emphasize this enough. You are flying through these areas at such an intense speed that they don't ever get a chance to feel special. This incredible speed also works against the big enemies of the game. In previous Tarsier games, enemies like the chef or the teacher felt so memorable because it took a while to get away from them.
The movie theater would have been the perfect place for this type of design too, so it's all the more disappointing that we didn't end up getting that. When we finally make our way into one of the showings, I thought for sure we would have to navigate through the rows of seats to avoid the ice cream man, eventually making our way through the projector room, still evading him along the way. But instead, this never happens. Our enemy quickly walks through the room, and then we exit out the back door, giving us almost no time spent in an area that felt like it had so much potential.
In the first two Little Nightmares games, players would have to navigate locations, solve puzzles, and occasionally stealth away from these big enemies. Sometimes the entire process would take upwards to like half an hour, and when you finally did get away from somebody like the chef from Little Nightmares, it felt like you completed that game's version of a boss battle. But because every environment and enemy in this game appears and disappears within 5 minutes or less, it feels like nothing. And while I don't think the supervisor or monster baby from Little Nightmares 3 are necessarily amazing, they do hit the same criteria I mentioned for being slightly memorable.
It seems that both games really suffer from the same issue here. There's a huge over-reliance on scripted rooms and chase sequences, while having very little to no freeform stealth gameplay. Most enemies in the first two Little Nightmares games have sections where you need to navigate a room while that area's boss roams around. While these aren't full stealth sandboxes by any means, there's still a level of autonomy on how you decide to go through these. Even though being seen means the enemies can and will chase you down, it's not just an automatic game over. You're still able to run and evade them to lose their tail. That's something that is almost completely lacking in both Little Nightmares 3 and Reanimal. In these games, it feels less like you've earned the success through your own creativity, and more so that you did what the game wanted you to do. There's a single room in Little Nightmares 3 that Dylan and I got stuck on for no joke over 15 minutes, and that's because we thought we had to navigate through the space and find our way out.
We were so accustomed to having to think creatively thanks to the first two Little Nightmares games, but with this third entry, little thinking is necessary to clear the game.
What ended up being the solution was to avoid the enemy long enough for the completely scripted sequence to play out, so they would then go and open a door to the next area. It is such shallow gameplay design, and completely emblematic of how both games miss what made the gameplay of Little Nightmares 1 and 2 so intimate and memorable.
However, I actually thought the Kin and his little creepy puppet were excellent, and they easily trounce any foe in Reanimal except maybe the first one.
I'm inclined to agree here, and the Kin serves as a really great example in highlighting Supermassive's talents, especially considering other ideas that are in Little Nightmares 3. There's a pretty big push to introduce new mechanics into the series, like how early on there's some umbrellas that can be used to reach higher places, or even to fall slower and safer. Our favorite new mechanic though is the time warping doll found in the last chapter of the game, which gives you a small window into how the environment looked in the past. This allows for some really unique puzzle designs where you have to use the doll to find an item in the past that you can then use in the present, and it's easily the most innovative idea between Reanimal and Little Nightmares 3. Unfortunately, the biggest issue with all of these new mechanics is that they are gone just as quickly as they're introduced, usually lasting no longer than 15 to 20 minutes.
Instead of simply discarding each item you get, it would have been cool to see them combine the item mechanics for trickier puzzles or platforming. Like, imagine using the umbrella from the first chapter while slowly falling down a crowded tunnel, while also having to use the time warping doll to open up pathways. But no. These cool items just feel like a one and done.
This problem isn't just exclusive to Little Nightmares 3 either, as Reanimal also has a similar problem. There's a handful of these really unique segments present that feature things like a couple of vehicles that can be driven around briefly, or an underwater scuba exploration section. The ideas here are truly interesting concepts that feel like they are taken away right before they really start to get their moment to shine. I would have loved to have gotten to solve a puzzle while driving the ice cream truck, or done more than just trudge through an underwater hallway in the scuba suit.
And just to reiterate, I truly cannot believe the lack of genuine puzzles in this game. Jer and I were both reflecting on the demo of Reanimal that was released in November of last year. The demo contains the aforementioned rotating engine cylinder puzzle, and It led me to believe that we would be getting more of these types of involved puzzles, but that wasn't the case. I don't want to come off as being dramatic or like I'm spinning some type of conspiracy theory, but the demo was deceiving. I think I could make a solid argument that this is closer to a walking sim than a genuine puzzle platformer.
After playing through and beating both of these games, it's clear to us that much of the discussion surrounding the two has been greatly sensationalized, to say the least.
Little Nightmares 3 is not the disaster that people act like it is. It's a perfectly serviceable game that I think is worth playing through with a friend via co-op.
And inversely, Reanimal is not the savior for the series that some would have you believe. These are two games attempting to fill the same void, and yet neither quite reaches the highs of the titles they're attempting to emulate. What we're left with is two halves of a whole game. Reanimal nails the atmosphere and expands the ideas into a more 3D environment, while Little Nightmares 3 has glimpses into some very inspired gameplay and enemy designs. Neither game is bad by any means, but it's hard to say either is particularly memorable either.
This is just another lesson in learning not to have any expectations. I'm not a fan of Supermassive at all, so I didn't expect Little Nightmares 3 to be anything noteworthy.
And yet, it still had pleasant surprises, even if the whole package wasn't all the way there.
But on the inverse, I absolutely adored Tarsier's Little Nightmares games, and I blindly gave them my money for Reanimal. Needless to say, after Reanimal, Tarsier has lost that blind trust.
I think that's a wrap.
Whew, yeah. Hey, at least we still have that other game to look forward to.
Wait, what other game?
You know, the one from former Tarsier devs, the one with the gun.
Oh, right. And it has the generic name too. What was it called again? Was it End of Abyss? I think that's right.
No. It's definitely called the one with the gun.
You're right.
Terrible business idea. What if we did like the opposite of Wagyu beef? Where like we like give the cow cigarettes and like scream at it and make it just feel terrible.
Put economic instability into the cow's life.
Yeah, make it pay taxes.
Right.